Hey everybody, welcome to episode 3 in the building of the B-25. And the title may have caught your attention, and I'll tell you what, it really caught my attention too. I nearly ended this project in disaster, and I'll explain to you why. Everything is fixed now, everything is good and in the proper place. But I have a question for you. Have you guys ever glued anything in the wrong position to the point where it just entirely ruins the rest of the build? That's exactly what I did, but I found a way to fix it, and I'll show you that in here in a minute. But what it was, I doubt any of you caught this in my previous video, but on this panel, and you may have noticed I've done some updates, I've done some more painting. In fact, on this half of the fuselage, I installed a seat and fire extinguisher, and I did some touch-up work on the side panels for the cockpit on both sides. But specifically this piece right here, if you were to go back and look at my last video, this panel right here is in a completely different spot. And I'll show you here a photo of what it looked like when I first installed it and glued it in. The entire piece, I had run cement around it, so it was well fused to the plastic fuselage. Well, and I didn't notice anything at all was wrong. I painted the whole inside of the fuselage. I did some, detail work, and then it came to, I was about ready to start assembling things, at least test fitting, dry fitting everything. And I took the Bombay, which acts as the wing spars, and I plugged them in, and you'll see there's two slots on this side that these two, well, if I had it facing the right direction, they slide in like so, and then they stick out the side, and that's where of course the wing slides onto there. So then I went to do this side, and there was no opening. This slot right here did not exist. I'm like, what on earth? Where did it go? Because I had tested it before. It's on the outside. Well, I incorrectly glued this panel about 1/4 of an inch to the right, and it covered up that slot. How I did that without realizing it, I'll never know. So there was no way to put, the strut or the spar through that slot and mate the two halves. So I'm like, well, I'll just simply pop it out and, it'll be no problem. But this thing was so well glued and cemented, and then I had painted on top of that. I was like, it's ruined. Really all I thought of doing was, well, just taking a Dremel and just grinding this whole panel out, sanding it flush, painting it, and then just not having this unit here at all. So I thought, well, before I decide to just demolish the thing, let me see if there's a workaround. And there was a little bit of a gap in this panel right here, and a couple smaller gaps in other locations, but primarily up in here. So I was able to get my X-Acto knife, I'll show you a picture of that, into that slot. And I'll tell you, I just kind of wiggled it, and I tried to slide it and do a cut at the same time. And as God is my witness, and by his miraculous assistance, as I was kind of working the knife around, I somehow dislodged the whole unit, and it popped off and went flying across my room, leaving a perfect, intact piece and the flat portion of the fuselage. So then, it was simply a matter of shifting it over into its right spot. And I will say, and I'm not making excuses, but the instructions were pretty poor on exactly where it went. In fact, I noticed that with all the other pieces as well. They have arrows pointing to the side of the fuselage, but they don't say exactly where. I mean, it fit perfectly 1/4 of an inch to the right, albeit it covered up the slot. But they're just not precise enough, and maybe I'm just not experienced enough, because I'm getting back into this hobby after decades of not having ever built one. So I need to improve my building skills as well. So that's something I should have caught. I would have appreciated, though, the instructions having been a little bit more clear. But that's neither here nor there. So when you build this kit, just keep in mind, make sure this is in a position where it doesn't cover up that slot, and also where you're not covering up the edge, because it is, look how close it is to that circular window. So you want to make sure you've got enough clearance to get that plastic window piece in there as well. So crisis averted. If I was not able to fix that, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I suppose I would have had to just forego the rear spar, and that probably would have worked, but you know, I don't know how much weight that wing panel is going to be, so I really wanted that extra support. So I fixed it. I did it right, but I nearly ended up scrapping this whole thing and having to buy a new kit. That might sound extreme, but I was at a loss for ideas. But fortunately, I was able to get that knife in there and just kind of work it, and it popped all the glue joints loose simultaneously and shot this thing across the room. But that worked out really well. So crisis averted. We can continue with the build. As you see here, I do have the bomb bay built up a little bit more. I've got these side panels in here. I airbrushed them silver ahead of time. I glued the bottom panel in. I guess it would be considered the top, since this is the top of the plane, this is the bottom of the plane. But I did not glue the bottom. I left this flexible because once the two halves of the fuselage come together, I'm gonna have to glue these out, so I may have to spread them a little bit. So I didn't want to make them too permanent. So again, they're only glued at the base here. So that piece is ready to go in. The cockpit, let me show you this. I did get the front nose strut installed for the front landing gear. Probably should have painted this before I glued it. Again, I was following the directions step by step and I wasn't thinking, so I'm gonna have to be very careful and airbrush this. Probably gonna go with a gunmetal or a silver over the flat gray. But one thing I did want to point out, and this is something I saw on another YouTube video, is this is a perfect place to glue some nose weight, so the plane will sit on its nose at all times and not want to fall back on its tail. You can put all the weight on the front wheel you want because it's not going to fall forward, but you definitely don't want it tilting back on the tail. So I glued, I think I counted 29 BBs, which equaled 10 grams of lead in the nose. And I just filled it with some thick CA glue, and it held them in nice and strong. So you can feel the weight to it, but I think that's going to benefit us when it comes to, you know, God forbid we end up with a tail-heavy airplane. I don't want it falling on its tail. That weight's going to help keep it on its nose. So that's one addition I made. The guns, haven't made any additional work on those yet, but I do want to show you this, the front bubble, the front portion of the fuselage, 3-piece, 2 clear plastic and 1 gray plastic, and then you've got 2 sets of double gun barrels sticking out the nose. Glued that up, and I did a beautiful job of leaving my fingerprint right here. Don't know how it happened other than I was pinching it right there, and I think I ran some glue, and this glue runs quicker than I anticipated it would, and it ended up picking up some of my fingerprint. But fortunately, this all gets painted over anyway, so I'll smooth that out with the sandpaper before I do the painting. So got the nose piece. So really, let me just do a mock build-up here to show you what she's going to look like and how it's coming along. I also painted up this is the bottom support that holds the mid gun turret. That little hole right there is what's going to capture the post on the bottom of this. But I'm going to deal with that one later. So let me slip the the cockpit into position, the bomb bay cargo area, and then slip this in, and you'll see that things pretty much come together. Not a bad fit at all. On the top, it's going to take a little shimmying, a little tweaking, but everything does line up and come together nicely. And then of course, once all that's done, then of course now I've got my nose piece, which will glue in nicely right there, but that's later on. But there it is, it's coming along nicely. I was able to salvage this poor kit from my mistake there on the, oh, see, in the process I just broke that loose. How about that? That's okay, because I only ran a thin bead of glue on the bottom anyway, because I didn't want to make it too permanent, because I didn't know how, like for example, see that gap right there? that's going to have to get pinched to meet the end of the side of the fuselage. So not a biggie. I'll re-tack that. But anyway, that's the progress we're making. Hopefully by the next time you see this, the two halves will be glued together, and then I can start filling in the seam and preparing it for paint as well. So there we go. So thanks for watching, and hope you all are having a great time on your builds if you're doing a build for Max's community build. And thanks for watching, and we'll catch y'all later.